Hello, everybody. I'm Ulrika Ryan. I would like to thank the organizers for trusting me with the responsibility to share a little bit about my thesis. As you can see, my thesis is called Mathematics Classroom Talk in a Migrating World, and the subtitle is Synthesizing Epistemological Dimensions. Before I say anything more, I would like to say that I had my defense in December 2019, so I have had some time to put some distance between the thesis and myself, so to speak. Currently, I have a position as a postdoc at the university, or at the Southeastern University of Norway. And I also have a position as a lecturer at Malmö University. And it was also at Malmö University where I did my PhD. Doing a PhD is far from a linear process. It's full of, at least for me, it was full of detours. Sometimes the detours were very rewarding. Sometimes I thought they were not so rewarding, more of an obstacle or hassle. Sometimes they turned out to be dead ends. Once I had some time to put some distance between myself and my thesis, I realized that although dead ends were quite frustrating then, I realized that I also learned from dead ends. So I think that doing a PhD is, of course, hard work, but it's also a great privilege that we have the time and the opportunity to allow ourselves to take those detours sometimes and do. That's my advice to you if you are working on your PhD thesis. I will speak about my thesis and what my thesis is about and why is that? Why does it come to be about what it is? I will do that by introducing myself and invite you to follow some bits of my PhD journey. I will focus on the problematic of the thesis. What is the problematic? What questions am I looking for answers for, and why are they there? That will be the main part of this afternoon and my talk. I will very lightly touch on theory and the theoretical aspects of, or toolboxes I have used in the thesis. I would also say very little about methods and touch slightly upon the results. So the main thing this afternoon I will talk about is the problematic of the thesis. I think that usually when somebody talks about their thesis, they talk about theory and the methods and the results. But I think that the reason why we do research and why we are interested in certain things, why we want to address particular kinds of problematics are equally important, and also a huge part of the thesis actually, and the whole PhD journey. So that is why I thought that I would take the opportunity today to talk about the problematic. You could say that this thesis is not purely an empirical thesis. It's rather what I call an empirically driven theoretical thesis. And I will come back to what that means during the speech. So my thesis is a compilation thesis. It consists of a wrapping. I don't know if that's really the right word, or a kappa, as we say in Swedish. I don't know if that word exists elsewhere, but it's like a covering document and 4 articles. And the 4 articles, in a sense, illuminates this kind of non-linear journey that a PhD thesis, writing a PhD thesis is. The first article, the one that is the first article number 1 in the thesis, is I wrote together with another doctoral student, Aldo Parra. Perhaps some of you know him. I think that this was the first article that I started writing, but it was not the first paper that I submitted to a journal. The second paper that I started to write was the article that is the second article here. I wrote it together with 2 of my supervisors, Professors Annika Andersson and Anna Kronacki. My third supervisor was Professor David Wagner. This paper was the first one to be finished, the first one to be accepted, but as you can see, it was also the last one to be published. So there's no linear idea here either. The third article I wrote on myself, all by myself, and I think also that was the third article that I wrote. And the fourth article was submitted at the time when I had my defense, but it was published last year. So if we look a little bit closer to the titles of these 4 articles, we can also perhaps see that the titles are a bit, perhaps not so coherent. Perhaps they don't really help you grasp what is the problematic here. What questions are Ulrika trying to address? The first one is called Epistemological Aspects of Multilingualism in Mathematics Education, an Inferentialist Approach. The second one, Mathematics is Bad for Society, Reasoning about Mathematics as Part of Society in a Language Diverse Middle School Classroom. We can see that it's about multilingualism. Mathematical Preciseness and Epistemological Sanctions. There's still something about the epistemological, but there's nothing about the multilingualism in the title. And then the last one is called A Joke on Precision, Revisiting Precision in the School Mathematics Discourse. So the question is, how do these articles come together? And that is also what frames the discussion about the problematic here. A result, well, you can talk about the results of your thesis in very many different ways, but one result could be expressed like this. There is an epistemological dimension to multilingualism, which is relational. That is one of my results. And I would like you to keep this idea in mind, and I will also ask you to keep a number of ideas in mind as I try to grasp the problematic here. But before we move further, I'm a little bit more curious about you, and I will also present myself a little bit more. So who am I? Well, I am a woman, I am Swedish, I am white, I am in my early 50s. I am a former math and science teacher. I primarily taught at primary school. I've been a teacher for 20 years before I moved into research. I'm also a former mechanics engineer. I am a mother of a daughter who is 23. I am an older sister. I am a partner. I am a bird watcher. I'm a runner. I am a skier. And I'm also perhaps not so young, but at least young in the research, mathematics education research field. So I'm curious about who you are and an idea of who we are. Thank you for sharing who you are with me. Now, why migration? Well, in 2015, as you all know, I'm sure, there was the refugee crisis in Europe and and also in the Middle East, of course, and in other parts of the world too, of course. But in the autumn of 2015, a great number of refugees came to Europe. And there was this Welcome Refugees movement, as you probably remember. Well, today the political climate in Europe has dramatically changed from them, but that's a different story. The position that the PhD position that I had was to do with migration, and the thing is that the Malmö University is located right next to the central station in Malmö, and during the autumn of 2015, about 160,000 refugees came to Sweden, and almost all of them passed through Malmö central station. So as I walked back and forth to the train station to get home from work or to get to work, I kind of encountered the environment there and the refugees, and it's deeply made an impact on me. So, but to say this, the position that I got was to do with mathematics education and migration. Apart from that, I was free to design my research project any way I would like to. It was not part of a bigger research project, but as I said, I could design it any way I would like to. So I started to think about what are my personal experiences of migration. What do I know about migration? Being born and bred in Sweden, I have never lived anywhere else. I have, in a sense, restricted experiences of migration. Yet, of course, migration is part of our everyday lives. I would say, in some way, all around the world. I was thinking about this PhD thesis as I said before, as a journey, and it's a journey that's located along a particular line of inquiry, which is the title of this thesis, Mathematics Classroom Talk in a Migrating World. I was starting to think about my personal experiences, like I said, and I wrote a prologue for my thesis where I, from a personal perspective, think about 3 divides. And I would like to share with you the first divide, which is located at the last part of the sentence, a migrating world. This is a divide that is to do with time, space, culture, displacement. You might want to say that it's a social-cultural kind of divide. And I share some, in this prologue, I share some snapshot-like personal viewpoints from a personal viewpoint of my experiences. And I say that these experiences are experiences made by a privileged white Western middle-class woman in her early 50s. On the other side of the divide are the experiences of the others, those who are not necessarily privileged nor Western, white, or middle class. So this is how I started to think about what I call divide number 1. Divide number 2 is located at the center of the sentence, talk. So this divide is about named languages, and named languages, I mean, by named languages, I mean, for instance, Swedish, Arabic, German, etc. It's about discourse, it's about social languages that we use in different social contexts. It's about a language divide. And I thought that we would also investigate here what languages we speak. I speak Swedish, English, and very little German. I understand Danish and some Danish and Norwegian. So I was thinking to ask you about your languages, but I realized that I might have to refrain from doing that because of time, for time reasons. So I think we will skip this Mentimeter exercise here and move on to the third divide, which is located at the beginning of the sentence, mathematics. So this third divide is about knowing mathematics. It's an epistemological divide about meaning, the semantics, and it has to do with access to mathematics. Who has access to mathematics? Who can present themselves as knowledgeable, as knowing mathematics in the mathematics classroom? So it's a kind of an epistemological divide. And I write about it in the prologue in this sense a little bit. During my first years at school, I battled with mathematics. Today, I know how to be recognized as a knower of mathematics. I am in possession of a hegemonic knowledge system. I am on the one side of great divide. On the other side are the others, those whose logic and knowledge systems are non-hegemonic, non-mathematical, or even amathematical. So this is the third divide that I try to think about in my thesis. So these divides, if we think about them, due to increased global mobility, these divides that perhaps before were neatly located geographically in the distinction between here and there, and culturally in a distinction or the dichotomy between our culture and their culture, the other. Linguistically, we might talk about mother tongues and foreign languages as separated. But today they appear in a complex, and so you might want to say messy, constellations in mathematics classrooms and in students' identity due to this global mobility. So that is also part of the problematic that I'm trying to approach here. So I kind of already started to invite you to juggle some of these balls, some of these divides to grasp the problematic. What about classroom talk? I would also like you to share your experiences of classroom interaction, of talking about mathematics with peers and teachers in group and whole class discussions. I think this is important because we invite our students to take part of small group or whole class discussions. Reasoning is something that we appreciate and that we put to the fore in the mathematics classroom. So we want our students to participate in discussions. But that also brings about emotions. So I would like you to move yourself back to your own time in school and think about how would you feel about sharing your ideas in whole class discussions or small group discussions? Did you enjoy sharing your ideas? Did you share your ideas, but perhaps a little bit reluctantly? Did you try to avoid sharing your ideas? Or did you perhaps never share any ideas? I would like to also invite you to think about, why did you give that answer? Why were you perhaps feeling confident about sharing your ideas in the mathematics classroom? Was it perhaps because you had access to the hegemonic language, the school language, or the language of instruction? Was it perhaps because you felt confident and because you had access to hegemonic knowledge systems? You knew school mathematics, so to speak, or did not know school mathematics, didn't feel that you knew school mathematics? Or was it perhaps because of the relations you had shaped with your peers and your teacher? Maybe it was because you felt that you were in a safe space where it was allowed to share and try out ideas. I think that if we think about this, these three dimensions, or what we might want to say about sharing ideas in the mathematics classroom, which I think is dimensions that if we change something, one of them, the other ones will be also affected. Because, for instance, if I were to give this presentation in German, I would not have access to a language that I would feel very comfortable with. I couldn't use my full language repertoire using German. It would be very restricted to what I could actually say, which would influence how my chances of presenting myself as a knowledgeable person, and which would also, of course, influence the relationship here. You would probably not think of me as particularly knowledgeable, so that will also influence our relations. So these three are connected somehow. I think we can all relate to this idea, perhaps having to share our research in a language that we are not so confident in. So this was a part of the complexity and the problematic I was trying to think about when I was trying to think about how to design this my research project. Of course, what you do is to start to read what previous research, what have other people learned, what do other people know about this complexity. I realized when I started to read that a lot of literature is about language diversity in mathematics education, of course, and about the first language as a resource. First language as a resource is ideas about how students should be allowed to use their first language in the mathematics classroom. It's also, of course, connected to socio-political aspects, sometimes to language policies. In Sweden, for instance, there is a language law saying that the language of instruction in Swedish schools must be Swedish. There are, of course, also pedagogical aspects about how can we ensure that students can use their first language as a resource, and what pedagogical designs can we use to allow that, or to enhance the possibilities that students can use their first language as a resource in their learning. And this has to do with access to mathematics learning and access to participation in mathematics activities in the classroom. Recently, there has been what you might want to call a translanguaging reply to the idea of first language as resource that a little bit problematizes the very idea of first and second languages, and I will come back to the idea of translanguaging further on. At the same time, as I was trying to read previous research, I was also interested in a philosophical theory called inferentialism, and I think that Robert Brandom, this dude, is the one who kind of is the father, so to speak, of inferentialism. I found this picture on the internet of him, and I think he looks like the very stereotype of a white male philosopher. So I don't know, maybe, yeah, I thought it was a kind of funny picture, so that's why I wanted to share it with you. But what was interesting and what was the core idea that I picked up from inferentialism is that meaning, that is the semantics of what we say, how we understand the meaning of what we say in a conversation, and the knowledge value, how we judge the knowledge value of what is said in a conversation, are two sides of the same coin in face-to-face conversations. So the idea is often that first we consider the meaning of what is being said, and then we move to consider the knowledge value. But according to inferentialism, this happens at the same time in face-to-face conversation. And that made me realize that there is an epistemological dimension to multilingualism. There was like a light bulb that was lit. But of course, I'm not the only one who's been thinking about this. There's a research team in Dortmund. I think perhaps Dylan is also part of that research team. That's Professor Susanne Prediger is in charge of, which very much take this into account and develop language responsive approaches that can be used in mathematics classrooms to also enhance multilingual students' participation in mathematics learning. And this is an approach that particularly takes into account the epistemological dimension. So, yeah, these were some balls that I started to juggle to grasp the problematic. Multilingual people translanguage when they speak, and that means that their full language repertories, which are comprised of all their language resources, are part of their language repertories, but they may be restricted as they speak, because they have to adjust their language repertories to the interlocutor's language repertories, of course. So although they might be restricted in the mathematics classroom, all the full language repertories are always silently present in the conversation. So also here today, all our language repertories are silently present in our meeting here. I also was thinking about the people draw on several named languages and social languages, epistemologies, and experiences made in several different cultural settings to grasp mathematics. This is also what happens in the mathematics classroom. So what about the students? My first research question is How do students in a grade 5 classroom framed by migration navigate language and epistemological divides when talking about mathematics? I try to use the idea of the didactical triad to explain a little bit more what it is that I'm interested in. And I'm sure you all know the didactic triad, where we have the teacher, the mathematical contact, and the learner. And often we try to follow the learner's learning trajectory and think about how can the teacher design the instruction in such a way that the learner can approach the mathematical content and learn the mathematical content. What I'm interested in is not the learning trajectories. I'm interested in how the students relate to each other when we, for instance, ask them to engage in small group conversations as they together encounter the mathematical content. So I'm interested in students' joint meeting with school mathematics. And this is a matter of language, of mathematics or knowledge, and about the relations. Oops, what should I do now? I wanted to do that, I think. So these are all some kind of, can be understood as some kind of epistemological dimensions. I borrowed this picture from a talk that Paula Valero had, I think at the YERME conference actually. This picture, she talks about network of mathematics education practices. I just stole this picture a little bit to illustrate all the complexity of all the languages, experiences, and knowledge systems and knowledges that students bring together into this conversation, into their conversations as they jointly encounter school mathematics. I'm still juggling this problematic a little bit. So how can this be approached then? Well, often in literature, the idea, multilingualism and the ideas that I'm trying to capture here are approached by the notion of first and second language, and also by the idea of the distinction between informal or everyday colloquial mathematics and school formal mathematics or mathematical language, or how it's it might be expressed. I was thinking that these dichotomies might not necessarily be particularly helpful when we try to understand how students together encounter school mathematics. So the first wave, so to speak, of the language as resource metaphor draws on this very distinction between the first and the second language. And the first language here functions as a vehicle to move the student from informal mathematics talk in the first language to school formal talk in the school, to school formal talk in the school formal mathematics talk, I think I wanted to say, in the school language or the language of instruction. And in the first article, Aldo and I problematize and critique a little bit this idea, because we think that, so in a sense, the school capitalizes on the student's first language somehow. So that's why we critique this idea a little bit. So the second research question is what theoretical conceptualizations of epistemological dimensions of language diversity can be used to frame the student's navigation of the divides. And navigation and navigate are used as metaphors for finding one's way in spaces that do not have established paths to follow. So it's not again about following a learning trajectory, but rather I think that these spaces that the students enter when they together encounter school mathematics are spaces that they need to find their ways in a little bit on their own. We have learning trajectories that we follow for their learning, so to speak. But this kind of idea that I was trying to build here, they are a little bit left alone to handle in their conversations. In my thesis, epistemological divides articulate difference when individuals and or cultures take or treat something as mathematical knowledge. And they emerge when people do and talk about mathematics. And I think that they always emerge when we do and talk about mathematics, because we bring all these experiences and languages and cultural backgrounds, etc., and knowledge systems into our conversations. And also, now I'm a little bit into the theoretical toolbox. Also, the idea of named languages I used as a kind of tool in my thesis, and the idea of idiolects instead of registers. Idiolects are individuals, individual varieties in how we use and understand the meaning of the words that we use, rather than when it comes to register. Registers are connected to situation of use, whereas idiolects are connected to individual use. And since, according to these researchers, people's idiolects never fully overlap. There are always discrepancies between what we think that we are saying and how our interlocutors understand the meaning of what we are saying. There are always small discrepancies, even among family and friends. I also wanted to move away from the dichotomy of formal and informal mathematics. So I used an idea that comes from post-colonial theory about ecologies of knowledges that Guterres has used and developed into the idea of mathematics. And here it's knowledge is a matter of inter-knowledge rather than a distinction between different kinds of knowledges. I won't dig into that any further. But, and I used inferentialism to try to grasp the uncertainty then, how people deal with the semantic and epistemological uncertainty in face-to-face conversations. And I used an idea that's called the game of giving and asking for reasons, the GOGAR. And perhaps some of you are familiar with the Ludwig Wittgenstein's ideas about language games, and this connects to his idea. So that was the theoretical toolbox. Let's see how we are doing with time here. So I used flexible research method, which means that I did not have method ready when I started to collect my empirical material. Rather, a flexible research method allows you to make changes, and along the way, it allows you to collect different kinds of data material and make decisions, as I said, along the way. So the empirical material in my thesis are interviews, individual interviews with students, grade 5 students. It is classroom observations, field notes. It is video and audio recordings, and it's also a small intervention about a mini project pivoting around a student comment. There was a student who said mathematics is bad for society. So the teacher and I decided to design a small project about this to engage with critical mathematics education. So this is what my empirical material for the thesis is. The school and the students, well, the class was a grade 5 class, and it was a social and language diverse classroom. It was not located in an area where it was located in a kind of a suburban middle class area, but a number of students traveled to the school from a little bit more deprived areas around. So there was a very socially and language diverse classroom But monolingualism was the norm, and it was a very strong norm at the school, because you never heard any other language but Swedish in the classroom, and you did not hear any other, or at least I didn't. And when I asked the students about it, they said no, also they didn't hear any other languages in the corridors or in the schoolyard. So the monolingual norm was very strong. Despite that, and there was actually students in this grade 5 class who was unaware of that they had multilingual peers, which is quite shocking, I think, because in this classroom there were students who spoke Albanian, Arabic, Bosnian, Hebrew, Kurdish, Norwegian, Persian, Polish, and Serbian. And here we can see how this global mobility has influenced the demography of many European cities and also many mathematics classrooms around the world, of course. So yeah, this was the students. And the analysis in the articles, I would say a few words about too. I have looked for nutshell cases, so to speak, in my articles. I have looked for nutshell cases that were rich in showing the ideas that or the complexity that I was trying to grasp, or I'm trying to grasp in my thesis. So the first two articles, I used the same kind of analytical framework that was designed to capture performances of the perspective of students' discursive grappling with conceptual meaning. This is the focus is around the conceptual meaning here. So you see, I didn't look for patterns across the empirical material, the full range of the empirical material. Rather, as I said before, I looked for these rich nutshell cases. In Article 3, I used an analytical framework that was designed to capture the performances from the perspective of a personal latitude. That is, of personal latitude, that is, what kind of space could the students move within? What latitudes did they have available for them to interact, and particularly around the notion of reliability and how could they present themselves as reliable knower of mathematics? How did they judge each other's claims, knowledge claims, etc.? And the fourth article, I moved in to think about discursive normativity and the norms that the students' conversations are framed by, so to speak. And I was thinking about difference here, and that difference I needed to be conceptualized and addressed somehow. So in this article, I take difference to be the outcome of the encounter of non-coinciding norms. And this is the article about the joke. So I particularly look about how a joke can allow us to enter a space where students can critique norms, challenge them, but they can also capitalize on these norms to position themselves, for instance, as superior to other students, or also superior to some kind of object or whatever. So humor is quite useful when we want to try to think about norms and how they play out in the mathematics classroom. And when we invite students to participate in reasoning activities, we also invite them to come into contact with norms, mathematical norms that are framing the way we think about mathematics. For instance, the idea of precision is very much part of mathematical language. We want to reduce precise definitions, etc., etc. And this also comes into the students' conversations and frame them in a particular way. And this joke is about precision in mathematics, and we explore here how this norm about precision influences students' classroom talk. So, what about some results then? How do students navigate this language and epistemological divide? What did I learn about the problematic that I tried to frame in my thesis? What can we learn about it? Well, they do navigate these epistemological and language divides in solidarity. I could see examples of where students, multilingual students, move their interlocutors into a translanguaging space where ideas can be negotiated from perspectives that not necessarily are the ones that, how must I say, that not necessarily are the ones that are just pivots around one named language, but that can take into account the meaning of several named languages, although the interlocutor might not, the interlocutor's idiolect might not be part, language repertory might not have this named language as part of it. Students also act in solidarity by overbridging meaning, overbridging two people's idiolects by, for instance, trying to find the in-between position that is missing for these people to be able to share knowledge and share understanding. There are also what I call Sherpa-like acts, where students try to carry reasons for another student's claim so that that student can still present him or herself as a knowledgeable person who knows mathematics. So this is a Sherpa-like act. Together, I can see, I found that students have some kind of meta-understanding of language diversity where they can perform these acts of solidarity. But also they can encounter the epistemological and language divides in harmful ways. For instance, they might expose each other to epistemological sanctions, where they put each other in positions where someone cannot defend their knowledge claim, and thereby also start to change the talk about oneself as a person who does not know mathematics, who is not mathematical knowledge, not a mathematical knowledgeable person. So this, of course, influences the students' identities. And here we can see that there's a lack of meta-understanding of language diversity. And the mathematics-based discursive spaces that we invite the students to take part of, for instance, asking them to reason, asking them to use precise mathematical languages, influences how they together, how they can interact and how they can relate to each other as they encounter school mathematics. And I was thinking of giving you some examples. Here is an example of a conversation that I had with a student, Aldrin, and he speaks Swedish and Persian. And as you know, I don't speak Persian. And he asked me to help him out with a textbook task where which said, he read it aloud to me, and it said two sides of a rectangle, I think it was. Two sides are 12.8, and then the two other sides are half as long. And I immediately said, are they longer or shorter? Focusing on half as part of the half as long expression. That is what I thought he was struggling with. So he immediately says longer. And of course, when something is half as long, it's not longer. So I wasn't really happy with this answer. So I said, if they are half as long, are they longer then? And of course, Aldrin is a clever boy, so he realizes that that Ulrika is not happy with my answer. So he goes for shorter. So he says, no, then they are shorter. And I kind of think, well, I'm not sure that Aldrin really grasped this idea of half here. So I said yes, a little bit reluctantly. But then he says, but why does it say long? Then it's not 12. So then I start to get the hang of things here. So I say, what did you say? Why does it say long? Is it that long that you're thinking about? And he says, yes, kind of half as long. So it's obvious that I was stuck with the idea that half is the problem here, and half is what Aldrin has not grasped. But that is not the case. It is long, which is at stake here for Aldrin. And when I looked at this dialogue again and again, I was thinking about the fact that Aldrin's Persian is also silently present in our conversation. So I looked up the expression half as long. I put it into an online translator, translated it into Persian, and then I translated it back to Swedish, and then it read half long. And if you read the textbook task and you understand what it said, what it says, that two sides are 12.8 and the other ones are half long, it doesn't make sense. That's a silly thing to ask. So I also asked a colleague at Malmö University who speaks Persian for help, and she explained the background, the historical background of ways of talking about long in Persian, and I realized that Aldrin helped me and moved me into this translanguaging space where also the Persian was present, silently present in our conversation, so that I could finally grasp what it was he was asking about. And I think that takes quite a lot of courage to move somebody into this space, because he has to ask me why, but why does it say long? And I think that he had to mobilize a bit of courage to pose that question. But that was what the key to this conversation. So here he moved me into a translanguaging space. Okay, so this is from the article called Mathematical Precision and Epistemological Sanctions. And Samir, he is a boy who is a newly arrived student. He arrived in Sweden about 2.5 years ago. He is an emergent speaker of Swedish, and he was part of a group task that the students conducted on measuring and judging angles. And when this conversation starts, it lasts for about 40 minutes, this group task. Samir starts by saying how good I am at mathematics. And then he forms a pair together with a peer, Darko, and then there are two girls who also forms a pair, and these two pairs interact in the group conversation. And the boys pose some claims about angles, and the girls, they do not undertake these claims as claims of knowledge. And eventually, this conversation goes on for 40 minutes, and eventually Darko blames their mistake, makes Samir responsible for them not being entitled to their claims as claims of knowledges. And this changes Samir's whole way of talking about himself. So at the very end of this conversation, he begs Darko for forgiveness, and he asks him, please trust me, as mathematically knowledgeable again. So I think this is a quite strong experience of how also students can use epistemological sanctions in a harmful way that changes the way students speak about themselves. And also, of course, about how they see themselves as mathematically knowledgeable persons that can participate in mathematics conversations. Also, how these conversations are shaped has to do with the mathematics-based discursive spaces. They constitute each other. The way the students can perform solidarity acts and also harmful acts connects to discussion, the mathematics basic discursive spaces that we invite them to inhabit when we ask them to participate in classroom conversations or in group conversations. So, like I said before, Greta's joke drew attention to precision. She was joking about the boys' angles, and she said they were supposed to judge each other's angles, but Greta then used the protractor to measure the boys' angles, and she said it's not a right angle, it's an obtuse angle, it's 91 degrees. And in the context there had developed a competition between the boys and the girls where they were competing about who can be the most accurate. So you can understand Greta's joke as a way of either challenging the precision norm or utilizing the precision norm to position herself in a superior position with regards to the boys. So I think that we need to be a bit sensitive about when we ask students to conform to the precision norm, because it's not a neutral practice. Rather, it involves asking them to engage in mathematics-based discursive spaces where they may produce negative sanctions towards one another. And this might explain why some students refrain from engaging in whole class discussions, which they are asked to pay attention to precision norms, or why they use vague language. That is, they say, rather than saying it is a right angle, students might say, I think it is a right angle. They use vague language to protect themselves from the risk of being exposed to negative, to epistemological sanctions. So in the last article of my paper, we suggest that attention to precision needs to be handled with care, particularly in multilingual mathematics classrooms. So, well, what does this result in? Well, maybe it's a good idea to pay attention to meta-understanding of language diversity and also the mathematics-based discursive spaces that we invite to the students to participate in, because they are two sides of the same coin. So I would like to thank you so much for your patience. Here in Sweden, it's a very, very hot day today. I don't know what it's like for you, but I think it's way over 30 degrees in my room here. So I thank you very much for your patience and for giving me the opportunity to share some ideas about my thesis. Thank you so much.